My name is Brock Martin. I'm the Director of Customer Success with Guard RFID. In my role, I work with all of our current facilities as a liaison between support and sales and operations. And I'd like to thank you again for joining in today's presentation. The ability to accurately secure and monitor the location of assets and individuals has many applications in healthcare, commercial, and industrial environments. The key to a successful RTLS deployment lies in picking the right solution for the application and problems at hand. And by following some basic RTLS selection guidelines, which we're going to cover today, you should be highly satisfied with your choice and be able to realize a faster return on investment. Today, we're going to look at common types, design, tags, integration, and much more. So let's go ahead and get started. Joining me on today's call are Carrie Brock and Merrick Dukavich. Carrie is our Chief Revenue Officer and leads our sales and marketing strategies and also oversees our customer success and implementation teams. She brings a 20-year record of demonstrated success driving our sales growth while providing award-winning leadership in highly competitive markets. Merrick is our Vice President of Technology and Product Strategy, and he leads our product management and tech support teams. In his 30-year career, Merrick has held leadership positions in engineering, product management, and user experience at successful high-tech companies, including Sierra Wireless and Polycom. So with that, thank you again for taking the time out of your day to join us, and I'll go ahead and pass it over to Carrie.
Thanks, Brock. Good morning, good afternoon, everyone. And again, thanks for taking the time to be with us today. So we're going to start with your environment and what your facility looks like. Now, a couple of things that you want to take into account when choosing an RTLS system is the availability of your power, your network connectivity, and then whether you're building a system indoors or outdoors or both. If you're going indoors in your typical commercial environment, then you have a much broader range of providers that you can choose from. As you get more specialized, you're in an outdoor environment, perhaps you have hazardous or an explosive environment, you may have a more limited set of vendors that can work and sell you technology that'll function properly in that environment. Same thing goes for once you're inside your structure. Is there a lot of metal or other things that are going to interfere with the RF signals? Do you have multi-floors? Do you have extreme temperatures depending on what you're manufacturing? Or maybe if you're outdoors, we have customers that have environments that go down as cold as -50. So, and again, another thing you may want to consider is, are you a multi-site or do you have multi-buildings? Because you're going to want to find a vendor that potentially has an enterprise grade system as well, where you can see your entire company across one screen and one system. Thanks, Brock. Next thing you want to consider beyond the environment, and now that you've potentially shortlisted some vendors that can function within your requirements, you're going to look at what do you want to track. So is it people, is it assets, or is it both? And what type of reporting is required for your system? When you take into consideration how many assets or people need a tag, you're also going to want to factor in the cost of the tag. And to justify installing and purchasing a system, you're going to want to look at a ratio between the area that you're covering and the number of tags required. Other things to consider into this would be the battery life and, of course, the size of the tag. So when you're attaching this tag to a person or an asset, you have to take into account is, does it fit? So the tags the size of the tag is often tied to the battery life. So if you're looking for an extended battery life, the tag gets considerably larger. So depending on the delicate nature of the asset or the person, for example, on a baby, obviously the tag is very small. If you're putting it on a bulldozer, it can be very large. You also need to take into account, does the tag need to be ruggedized? Does it need, do you need to check the IP rating, which would have to do with dust and waterproof? EX rated tags, again, that's something that we provide, but there's very few vendors out there that are EX rated. So if you have a hazardous or explosive environment, you're going to need to make sure that you meet those standards as well. And again, the cost of the tag versus the value of the asset. So if the tag costs more than what you're trying to track, you may have to consider, is that really going to meet your return on your investment? Another thing to consider is tamper detecting needed. So is somebody going to attempt to remove that tag? Is the person going to attempt to remove that tag? So For example, if you're in a healthcare environment and perhaps it's a seniors care home or a behavioral health unit where the person is going to be somewhat destructive and try to remove that tag, you want to make sure that the band or where that's going to attach to the person is going to be out of reach, or that they're going to be unable to remove that, or you need tamper detection, either heat or light or motion, so that you know that the tag is being, or the band has a cut band technology so that you know somebody's tampering with it. And again, attaching it to the person, you want to consider the sensitivity of their skin. And if it's in an industrial or commercial environment, you want to take into account the gear that that person might be wearing. So if somebody is wearing large, heavy gloves, it won't be easy for them to push a button on a tag or maybe access it. So, if they work in a very warm area where there's a lot of heat, you don't want the tag exposed directly to the heat. It may have to go inside somebody's protective clothing. So all things to consider, and you want to talk to your vendor about the types of tags that they have for those environments. Thanks, Brock. So a couple other things to take into consideration. Obviously, budget. Defining your budget when you start this project is a good idea, making sure that it's approved. And what we recommend is looking at your total cost of ownership over a 10-year span. So when you take into account the hardware, the installation costs, pardon me, the software and the tags, pardon me, the support in your subsequent years, you're going to look at that lifespan of the system. You also want to consider how we measure the return on investment. Do you have a way to define what the system needs to do and how you're going to measure this and what your time is to pay this back? One other consideration that I would also recommend is that the company has the executive sponsor, and that you've also included other departments such as IT, security, health and safety, HR, and potentially in some, if this is an application where we're looking at employee accountability or personnel safety or emergency man-down lone worker type systems, you may also want to consult with the union if that's your environment. And another, last but not least, and we're certainly seeing a lot more of this, is a privacy policy for the people that you are tracking. So whether that's patient information that's kept confidential, or whether that's a privacy policy for your employees. We're also seeing an increase in companies using active RFID or RTLS systems for contact tracing now that we're find ourselves in a very unusual situation in a pandemic. There's a lot of questions around the contact tracing and how will the data attach to that, or if you do have employees that test positive, you're checking temperatures. You want to ensure that you're not saving that information in the system and that somebody else could access that health records. Brock. This is also another important consideration. Are you working with a system integrator, or are you purchasing the system directly from a vendor? Both scenarios can work very well. The recommendations around the system integrator is if you've used them in the past, that can be beneficial. They're familiar with your company, maybe they're familiar with your facility. If they are already supporting other systems within your facility, that too can be beneficial, as sometimes you'll want to integrate functionality from other security systems into the RTLS system. If that integrator has experience with RTLS, that's definitely beneficial. And if possible, I try to work with an integrator that has local staff that can be on site at your facility. And if they also have their own technicians versus them subcontracting out the electrical work, because that, again, adds costs into your total cost of ownership as you add another layer of expenses into that. Next slide. There we go. Thank you. So now let's shift a little bit from your environment and what you're trying to track to what the vendor has to offer. So first off, obviously, is what's their level of expertise in RTLS systems? Is this a single area of focus? Is this where their expertise lies? Is their technology proprietary? So is this something that they've purchased and or they've built for themselves, or are they buying somebody else's technology and repurposing it with for their solution. And the other thing you want to be aware of is what is the scope of services that they can provide to you and to your business. We like to see that they would be able to help you with the system design, project management. You may want to look at the types of training that they offer, technical training for either your IT people or your installation people or for the system integrator. Also want to make sure that there's documentation and videos and support for user training. And if it's a healthcare situation, definitely recommend that they have clinical trainers so that they can work directly with the nursing staff and healthcare workers at your facility. I think it's important that they're able to support you on the commissioning and the go live, which means the system is tested and deemed to be functioning to expectations. And you also want to look into the technical support. So even if it's purchased through a system integrator, and your system integrator is going to provide you that tier 1 support, the tier 2 and tier 3 support, if there's an escalation or a technical issue, it's really important that the vendor can support you on this. I'd be looking for things like 24/7 coverage. I'd be looking to find out where their support is done, if that's onshore or offshore, and if they outsource it or it's their own employees and staff that take care of that technical support within North America. And last but not least, software updates. You want to find out what the warranty is going to be on the system, on the tags, how they handle returns or replacements. You want to find out if your software updates include things like new features, bug fixes, and major updates. You also may want to find out how often do they do software releases and how do they inform you of those. Thanks, and I'm going to pass it over to my colleague Merrick to take you through some of the more technical aspects of the systems.
Hello everyone and welcome. RTLS, RFID, EX, and all those types of things. It's a bit of an alphabet soup. And in the next few minutes, I'm going to hopefully be able to help you navigate that and know what types of questions to ask the vendor when you're looking for an RTLS solution. So we'll first start by looking a little bit into the specifics of RFID. RFID tags are pretty pervasive within the retail industry. If you've run a marathon in the last few years, you probably had an RFID or a 10K race embedded in the actual number you were wearing, and they are very widely used. The difference between those passive RFID tags and the active RFID tags that we use for RTLS systems is the presence of a battery. So if you turn your attention to the top right of the picture over there, you'll see that the one on the right, which is a passive RFID tag, just has a big coil, and that coil is actually used to pick up a high energy RF from a reader, which causes the device to come to life and send its information back to the system. With an active RFID tag, on the other hand, it actually has a built-in battery. It can transmit in a longer range, and as a result, it can do more things, and it doesn't have to be very close to that exciter or the antenna in order to actually operate. The picture on the left will show you a little bit of that. So a passive tag needs to be within a few meters of the reader or the antenna, whereas an active tag can be as much as 100 meters away and still be broadcasting its information. The difference is if you just turn your attention to the table on the bottom right there. So for passive RFID tags, the advantage is they're small, they're cheap, they're battery, or they don't have a battery, so they last for many years. However, they have a low range and are not really feasible or usable for RTLS. You can detect something coming in a door and going out a door, but if you want to find out where it is in a big warehouse or in a hospital, it's not going to be that useful. For that, you would turn to active RFID, where it costs a little more for the tags. You're going to have to actually replace that battery every few years, but you do get the advantages of the 100 meters of range. Next slide, please, Brock. Next, I've got 4 different types of active RFID RTLS technologies to compare. I'll give you a quick description of each of the 4, and then we'll work our way down the horizontal lines of this table and give you a little bit of flavor as to what you can expect when you use the different technologies. So starting on the left, the 433 megahertz active RFID, that's the core of our Guard RFID product solution. It's very widely used for patient security type of applications where you want to attach a tag to a patient or a baby, or in the case of staff members that are wandering around a facility and might need to call for help. It has some very positive attributes compared with the other technologies, primarily due to the fact that the lower frequency of operation, the 433 megahertz, is better at penetrating objects when it's shielded, either by a human body or by metallic structures. The second one from the left is Wi-Fi. This is probably the most widely deployed active RFID technology today. The advantage there is that it shares its actual communications medium with the data communications infrastructure that is often in place already, and hence the installation costs can be significantly lower than with a dedicated RFID or RTLS technology. The downside is that the fact that the RTLS was an add-on to a technology that was originally designed for data communications causes the power to have to be higher, which causes more expensive tags, slightly larger tags, and or a lower battery life. UWB is another technology that's been custom designed for RTLS. The big advantage of this one is that its accuracy is significantly better than the others. If you just turn your attention to the horizontal line with accuracy on it for a minute, you'll notice that the UWB can get you the accuracy within 30 centimeters, or the length of an arm, as Gartner likes to talk about it, which actually allows you to get very close and find an object without having to really look for it. The other technologies get you within a few meters, which is good enough for many applications where, providing you get into the right room, you can see something that's 3 or 4 meters away. So that's typically useful in those cases. But if you're trying to find something hidden, UWB will be better. Its challenge is that it doesn't work all that well in RF shielded environments and in multipath due to the higher frequency and the wide frequency range of operation. So it works very well when things are tuned well, but it doesn't necessarily deploy all that easily. It's more difficult to deploy. And then finally, on the right-hand side, we have Bluetooth Low Energy. This is an add-on to the Bluetooth standard that's been around a long time. It's been specifically optimized so you can get good battery life and low power out of tags, and hence it gets equivalent performance in terms of accuracy to the active RFID and Wi-Fi technologies, but lower tag cost, lower infrastructure cost. However, it is still relatively new, so some of those are actually evolving, and we do expect that a little bit of the infrastructure cost may go up as things get to be more manageable and more enterprise grade rather than the commercial grade that it is today. So we'll just quickly work our way down each of those rows. I've spoken to a few of them already. So the frequency, I mentioned that the core frequency, the lower the frequency, the better the penetration. You'll also see that for active RFID and Wi-Fi, I've listed 125 kilohertz infrared and ultrasound. Those technologies are used to help position the tag either within a floor, so 3-meter accuracy could be floor 1 or floor 2. These lower frequencies are used to assess which floor you're on or which room you're in. Again, a 3 to 4 meter accuracy could mean that you show up in a different room to the one you're actually in, and these low frequency detectors are put inside the room so that you can tell down to room level accuracy. Most of the rest I've spoken to. So, typically when you're buying this type of solution, the cost of the infrastructure installation is important, but it's also important to consider the tag cost you're going to have to replace these every few years. So what's the cost? Is it a replaceable battery, or do you have to buy a new tag? And that often goes with things like waterproofness and some of the other aspects that Kerry has already referred to. Next slide, please, Brock. So just a little bit, you've heard it in my words, Gartner has a group that tracks indoor location systems, and they've effectively said some of what I said previously. The key aspect here highlighted in blue is that 433 megahertz has many benefits when maintaining contact is imperative, and that comes back to these personnel security or personnel safety types of applications. Next slide. The other key point that Gartner likes to bring up is that there isn't really a single technology that's perfect for all of the types of RTLS solutions that you might have. You may well want to use 433 megahertz for people, but at the same time deploy an overlay that would actually use Wi-Fi or Bluetooth for tracking your assets, where it's less important that you actually can react very rapidly to changes, but cost is more of a key contributor to your buying decision. And with that, I will hand it back to Kerry.
Thanks, Merrick. I'm just going to share some use cases from the field. This is an example of an employee accountability system put in at a factory that manufactures chocolate. They were having a challenge with personnel coming and going from the facility, being able to track them, and then taking that time and attendance and sending that to their payroll system, so for the HR department. So an RTLS system was installed with portal detection, which picks up the employees from their tags every time they enter and exit the facility. It also gives them, they also have RTLS inside, which will show them the location of employees or people dwelling too long in break rooms or lunch rooms. And they can take this information, it's automatically exported out of the RTLS system and into their payroll system. So it's saving them time, it's saving them money. And if they need to, they can account for everyone at any given time within their facility. Been a successful deployment, and they've actually expanded this system. The next one is an example of an enterprise system. So as I mentioned, if you have multiple facilities or multiple buildings, in this case, this is 22 hospitals in Utah. They've been on the system for many years. It's an infant security system that goes across all of their hospitals. There's also a very broad use of different tags to meet the patient needs. So as I was mentioning, they have everything from preemies in a NICU to healthy babies and pediatric patients. And so a wide range of tags will make your clinical users very happy. They can select the right type of band based on the sensitivity or the delicacy of the baby's skin, especially in preemies. Their skin's extremely delicate. Babies gain and lose weight, so you'll see those colored bands adjust to they come in multiple sizes to adjust to the baby, so you can change those out if the baby is growing and gaining weight. The small green and purple tags attached to umbilical cords, those are great for healthy babies. They stay out of the way, and they don't cause any false alarms because they don't get disturbed or move around on the baby's limbs. So that's an example of where you need more than just a single site system, making sure that the software that you're purchasing is enterprise capable. This is an example of multi-product deployment. So does your vendor offer a software platform that has multiple RTLS features and solutions all in one? So in the case of the AllGuard system from Guard RFID, when you purchase the AllGuard software, you have access to all the features and all the functions. So this is for this particular hospital. Why this was important to them is they not only use the infant security, but they also have staff to rest. So their users and security only need to understand one software platform. And again, it's also multi-facility and multi-building. So they're combining that multiple product and enterprise deployment together. This is an example of asset tracking. So in this particular lab environment, it's a very clean environment. You'll see lots of people working very close together. They're developing new technology. So the concern for this facility was tracking their intellectual property and making sure that somebody didn't remove something from the facility. And also they're tracking their workflow progress. So as a device moves from one workstation to another, they can track that and see the progress of the development that they're working on. So this is an excellent example of RTLS. And again, as I was mentioning, the size of the tag has to fit onto potentially small devices or small pieces of technology. So again, as you decide what system is right for you, you also need to look at the range and accuracy of the tags and the size of the tags. This is an example of an outdoor deployment. This is an energy company located in Texas. They have 100+ substations where they wanted to do a couple of different things. First, they wanted to have hands-free access control, and what that means is their employees approach the gate at the substation and it will unlock for them based on their tag and their credentials. They'll be able to track the person while they're inside that substation. If there's an emergency or something occurs, they'll be able to determine if that employee is still within that facility. They also wanted to secure the outdoor cabinets that they have and make sure that those didn't get left unlocked. So you'll see in that picture in the middle, there's a small device on the door of the cabinet. So when the cabinet door opens, it registers that it's open and it will sound and trigger an alarm if the cabinet door is not closed again once the person leaves the vicinity. Oil platforms. So here's a good example. There's not going to be very many vendors, for example, that have equipment that's going to function in this environment. So most probably they need an EX rated equipment to work in oil and gas. Second, it's going to have to work in an outdoor environment. Third, there's going to be a lot of RF interference. As you can see, this is very much full of metal, multi-levels, harsh environment. So again, as your environment gets more complex, the less vendors that there are out there to choose from. In this case, the system is tracking employees. An emergency event on an oil rig obviously can be catastrophic. So this accounts for the personnel. If there is an emergency event, a mustering event is triggered, and they can see if everybody's arrived at the muster station and who is missing. It also has a presence detection feature and dwell time. So that's also important. If you want to know not only where people are, but how long they're in an area, that's another feature that you want to make sure your system has if that's important to you. Port container tracking. So again, this is a large item. A bigger tag, a ruggedized tag makes sense in this environment. Has to be waterproof. Has to be able to take a certain amount of abuse, that tag, and a long battery life is also really attractive in this case. So the batteries and the tags that they chose for this deployment is a 5 to 6 year battery life, which is really great. You don't have to change them. What they can do is they can see the real-time visibility on these containers, the inventory, they can track the location of it. They have an automatic detection of when the container comes in or exits the yard, and it allows them to manage the containers being delivered to the offshore sites. This is again another example of outdoors. So I talked at the very beginning about your environment and what kind of power source you have. So this is again an enterprise deployment. They've got 10 locations, but they needed solar power. They do heavy equipment outdoors, and they don't have power out at the fence line. And of course, in a big open field where they store this equipment, these fields can be 10 plus acres. So solar power made a lot of sense with Wi-Fi, long-range Wi-Fi, to be able to connect to the network. So they use this system to give themselves real-time visibility to their inventory. This allows the salespeople to see what equipment is available to sell. It also tracks all their rentals, and it prevents theft, and it allows them to centralize. So here's an example of a company looking for the return on investment. What they found is they had a lot of inventory growing stagnant at locations. And now what they're able to do is centralize their inventory, realize when a site is getting low on something, they can then send more of that inventory to that particular location without having to call somebody, check what they actually have on hand. This gives them real time, and the return on investment for them has been very good. So again, a bit of a complex environment, the need for enterprise. So those are things you want to be checking for if that meets, if that sounds like your requirements. Just a little bit on the architecture itself. So typically I'm using the AllGuard system for an example, but most systems should function this way. So you have a server. It's typically, depending on the type of environment, it's either located on your premise or it's in your virtual environment. You have a database that stores all the tag events. You have the desktop client or a web client or a mobile client, depending on what your needs are. And again, when you're trying to determine what kind of system that you need, make sure you're taking into account. So if you think about the yard management example I just showed you, they need obviously a desktop client for the folks that are managing the inventory and the salespeople, or a web client, but they also need a mobile client for the person that's wandering around in the yard, getting the rental equipment and bringing that to the front for the clients to pick up. So having those, making sure that an app or a mobile device exists. Again, same thing in an emergency mustering solution or a lone worker. You most probably have some emergency responders or safety team, security team that will want that mobile feature. Very important. Also, you want to look into the reporting capability. Does the system that you're purchasing have the ability to produce reports for you? Are those canned reports, or are they customizable to your needs? Or can you export the data from the database and into your enterprise system, whether that's like a third-party application? So make sure they have an API so you can either connect, and I'm going to let Merrick talk a little bit more about this in more detail, but it's really important to make sure that there's an API and the ability to export the data out of the system. And then you have the proprietary equipment. In our case, it's a 433 megahertz system. So we have our tags, our readers, and our exciters. And so that's what I was mentioning earlier, is making sure that the vendor you select, that they are manufacturing this equipment and tags, and that they're not relying on a third party that could then no longer be available, and suddenly your system is obsolete. So I want to talk briefly about design next. So there's a balance here between the design and the range and the accuracy and your budget. So as I mentioned, depending on how large of an area you're trying to cover, you can run into situations where it becomes cost prohibitive. So if you only need to track 100 items, but you need to do it across 1 million square feet, you may find that ratio to tags and area covered just becomes a little bit prohibitive. So determining that coverage area that you absolutely need, you want to be able to see your devices and your tags in that software, and the system should self-monitor to tell you that your tags the batteries are good in the tags and that the devices are all online. The software should use your floor plan so you can easily recognize your facility. You need to just determine, again, if you're inside, outside, or both. In some cases, if you're going to track people coming in and out of your facility, you may have equipment located on the outside of your building as well as the inside. We talked about network availability, power requirements. Ceiling height is important, and if you don't own the facility that you're in, you may need landlord approval to install in the exterior and common areas of the building. And sometimes color and size of the hardware comes into play. We have worked before where architects are involved. We had to once customize keypads for a hospital where they insisted on everything being white. Typically those keypads are silver. So we had to source something different. We've also had cases where the landlord wants the color of the enclosure for the equipment to be a certain color or design. So you never know. Always good to talk to the building owner before you get started, or if it's new construction. There could be architects or other folks involved, so good to have that conversation. And then this is just a quick slide, again, highlighting. Here you'll see this is someone's floor plan. You should be able to give the names and indicate the areas or rooms so that your people easily recognize their facility. You'll see the little blue devices in the circles. There's green check marks. That means all those pieces of equipment are online and the system is functioning accurately. The blue square is a tag. You can see that it's sending a proper signal and it's being picked up by all the equipment in its vicinity. And then if you do have a muster area, you want that to be indicated as well so you can see as people arrive to that. Let's talk about that balance between range and accuracy. This is where sometimes people get fooled. Somebody says a tag has a range up to 1,000 feet. That is true, and there are tags that absolutely will go that far. The problem is that means that asset is picking up, the accuracy of picking up that tag might be 1,000 feet or hundreds of feet away. So you have to decide, do you need to have accuracy of being able to find a person or an asset at 6 to 10 feet, or is 60 to 100 feet fine? And that is going to impact your cost. So the more tight accuracy you need, the more equipment needs installing. So for every device that you buy, you also have to pay to install that and to power it up. So that's the question is, do you need to just know how many people are in a given designated area? Or do you need to know that someone is sitting in a particular office or a patient is in a particular room? And so getting that, determining whether you need that room level accuracy or just an area accuracy or simply a portal detection, I just simply need to know who came into the building and who's left the building. That will greatly impact the cost of your system. And so when you're talking about range and accuracy with a vendor, make sure you're very clear on what it is that you're trying to do with the system. Otherwise, you'll find yourself buying additional equipment or that maybe you bought too much. And the last thing I'm going to talk about is the tags themselves. So just to recap that, people and assets are very different, obviously. So on people, make sure the vendor that you're talking to has different options on how you're going to attach them. Not everybody's compliant with wearing them or want to. If people are going to keep them on for extended periods of time, waterproof so they can shower or be bathed with them on is important. Is that person capable of attaching it to themselves, or does somebody else have to do it? So if that's the case, in a healthcare environment, we're attaching these to babies, for the nurses who are very busy, you want to make that a simple process. If your security people are handing out badges or bands or wearables for employees or visitors or contractors, again, you want to make sure that they can attach it to a badge or make it wearable so it's simple. When you're talking about assets, considering the size of the asset, if you can put a larger tag on it that gives you a lot longer battery life and you don't have to recharge batteries, that certainly makes it simple. But I will recommend, if you're talking about tracking thousands of assets, there is somebody that needs to start this project. We'll have to go around and put that tag on every single bulldozer or every single piece of equipment. As I was showing you that example of the 10 yards, somebody has to go around and be responsible to do that. And then you have to determine what should be tagged. And so keep all those things in mind. If your system that you're buying Wi-Fi versus a 433 megahertz, Wi-Fi tags are much more power hungry, as Merrick mentioned. So if you've got to recharge batteries and take them back all the time and put tags on charging stations, that too can become very onerous for employees, where just simply replacing the tag might be a better way to go. So with that, I will turn this back over to Merrick, and he can take you into more details on the integrations.
Thank you, Kerry. So I'll leave you to read the quote there on the left-hand side, but the gist of it is that in most cases the RTLS system that you're purchasing or installing is likely to be part of a broader system that's doing more than just locating assets or people. Often, in the case of our solutions, they're part of a security solution, and it's important that they work well with the alarm management solution that the customer has deployed. If an alarm goes off in our system, that should be relayed to the right people, not too many people. You don't want to have people bombarded with alarms they can't do anything about. And also you want to make sure that the right people are notified in a timely fashion about that alarm. Video management systems is another example where if something happens at a doorway and there's an alarm that goes off, maybe somebody's trying to steal something, it would be nice if the video camera would automatically focus itself on the doorway of relevance and inform the security people and anybody else that might be informed with a little more than just there's an alarm gone off. If you could pop up a little screen within the application showing you the picture of it, you could take more appropriate action and decide whether this is something that you need to call the police about, or whether it's just somebody that's taken something out by accident for a lunch break. So those integrations are extremely important. And if we go to the next slide, we'll walk through a few of the considerations that you should make when you're considering these integrations. I often get our salespeople coming to me saying, are we integrated with company XYZ? And a simple answer might be yes, but the more complete answer is, well, what do you mean by that integration? Let's actually sit down and see what is the use case that we want. Do we want the alarm that's generated in our solution to show up in the other solution, or do we want information from the other solution to show up inside the Guard RFID solution, which would require a two-way integration? Often of relevance is which UI is going to be used. In an asset management example, often there's an asset management system that a company is using, and they'd really want to see the location information in that asset management system rather than having to have a whole separate application from the RTLS vendor that shows the location. Or maybe it's a hybrid and you've got information about which area the asset is in the asset management system, and if you want to drill down to find it within a few meters, well, then you would switch to the RTLS system. So defining those use cases is important when you're setting out on the journey of installing the system. The second aspect is the implementation options. We support several different types of application options, implementation options. The first one that I've listed here is the IHE. This is a healthcare initiative to standardize the different APIs so that different types of equipment and different systems can talk to each other efficiently. We're active members of the IHE organization and work. We get together annually with other members to test our solutions out and to work with them. On the right-hand side there, you'll see an example of one of those integrations with Braun, who makes infusion pumps. So they attach tags to their infusion pumps, and we can then relay information in our GUI about not just where the tag is, but what is the associated information of the equipment on which that tag is attached. Maybe it needs servicing, or maybe I want to find an infusion pump that's not in use quickly, so we can display all of that type of information in our GUI. The second option is that we do have our own REST API, so partners can develop to that API, and on the flip side of that, we can develop to a partner's API. In some cases, that development work has already been done, and there's an integration fee. If you're needing something special, or your customer's needing something special that hasn't been done before, there may be some NRE that's required for that integration. So it's important to get that defined up front and not get a bit of a surprise at the back end when you discover that integration has some charges attached. And then thirdly, when we actually get to installing the system and commissioning the system, there's typically some setup that needs to be done. You need to define characteristics in the one API that match the other API. And you need to allow time and expertise to make sure that that's set up, tested properly, and make sure that the solution is working as designed. And then the final bullet on the slide here is that everybody's continually evolving their solutions, and those partners need to make sure that they keep up to date. If we actually update our solution, is it going to work with the last version of the other vendor's solution, or do you have to update the two together? Important things to consider when you're going through the upgrade process, which will necessarily happen, and typically you should plan on that at least once a year. Next slide, please. Okay, this is going to wrap it up, so get your questions ready. The key goal of the webinar today was to give you some more information to help you when choosing an RTLS solution. And I think one of the key decision points here is, are you looking for something that's purpose designed for RTLS, that's going to give you the best, smallest, broadest selection of tags and work very well in shielded environments? This is the types of solutions where safety is super important. Security solutions often fall into that category. Or if you have a slightly lower importance task where it's not really that important whether you track the stuff in and out, you want to know where it is, but it's not a multi-$1,000 asset. So if it goes missing, it's not the end of the world. And there you can get benefits out of actually leveraging a solution that also does something else for you. So in those cases, Wi-Fi or Bluetooth might be good options, since you already have infrastructure that you're deploying for other purposes that can lower the cost of entry to get the solution working. But be aware that there will be some design level trade-offs relative to solutions that were purpose-built with RTLS in mind. Okay, thank you very much for listening, and I will turn it back to our moderator.
Great. Well, thank you very much, Merrick and Carrie. Great information. And as we mentioned, we wanted to leave some time here at the end for any Q&A that may have come up. Throughout the presentation, there was a few that had come in. So we'll give everyone a moment. I'll just remind you, in that left-hand box on your screen, you'll see the Q&A. Go ahead and enter that in there. But I'll go ahead and get started with some of the ones that are already in place. Merrick, there's a question here about mixing two different technologies together and whether that is a possibility.
So I think this question is probably referring to, could you use a Wi-Fi solution and a Bluetooth solution, or a Wi-Fi and an active RFID solution? And the shorter answer is typically yes. The technologies are designed, and the frequency spectrum is designed such that there can be coexistence of products. There is some concern in some cases that the 2.4 gigahertz band in particular can get overloaded with different devices. So then, if you're really worried about that, then choosing a custom solution may be better. But in general, it is possible to actually use one solution for tracking people, for example. In the discussion I had earlier on, 433 megahertz may be a better choice there. But if you've got some low-cost assets that you want to track, that could be tracked with a Bluetooth or Wi-Fi, and the solutions could coexist. One thing to be slightly aware of is that don't have too many solutions. They may coexist, but if you're having to have, as an example, some hospitals that have 6 or 7 RTLS systems deployed, you've got 6 or 7 contracts you're managing, 6 or 7 upgrades, 6 or 7 different help desk lines that people might have to call. So having a single vendor or a single system integrator that is front-ending those solutions could well be very important to making sure your day-to-day life is not too onerous.
Perfect. Thank you very much. Carrie, this might be for you. Can an RTLS system be designed to generate from to traffic matrix for 18 employees between various departments and on any given shift?
Thanks, Brock. So I think what we're looking for here is, if I'm understanding this question, is like a breadcrumb trail. So to be able to see where everybody's gone during that work day. And yes, you could see where people are going. You can also look at direction of motion. So we're doing that right now with contact tracing, for example, making sure that people are using the up stairwells and the down stairwells, and sticking to path direction of motion paths within warehouses and manufacturing facilities.
Great. Another one for you, Carrie. In a medical facility, active tags will be suitable for what types of assets, where passive would be more used for can we maybe describe the difference, I think is what they're asking, when you would use passive versus
Sure.
active?
So, great question. So again, this comes down to the cost. So if you're tracking something in the hundreds or even thousands of assets, and you need to know real-time location of them, where the asset is, or you want some data from the asset you're tracking. So Merrick gave an example of the beeper on pump. I'll give you an example of a real one. So a hospital wanted to track trays of test tubes going to the lab. So the tray itself is large enough to put an active tag on, but a test tube can only work with a passive tag because you cannot affix and there's just far too many test tubes to make that cost effective. So that would be the example. So you've got 20 test tubes in a tray. They each have a passive tag. The tray themselves has an active tag, or the cart that they're on has an active tag. And that way you know which lab has received which test tubes and trays of tubes. It's a good question, thanks.
Perfect. Another one here, we'll just do a couple more, and if we can't get to all of them, we'll certainly follow up here. Someone is asking, any solutions to assist with social distancing and room capacity tracking?
Sure, so great question. We did do recently a webinar on contact tracing, and I'm happy to do one specific because some information has updated since then. So RFID and social distancing is a little bit trickier. We found that room capacity or dwell times in contact tracing has become much more of a relevant solution now that we know more about the virus transmitting. We know that being indoors is 20 times more dangerous than being outside with other people, and being in contact with people for more than 15 minutes. And the more people in a room, the more viral load there becomes within a room. So capacity in the room, knowing how many people are in there, knowing how long they've been in there is far more important. Social distancing is generally, we've seen some apps that do this to a certain degree, but people are aware of the 6-foot recommendation and to wear a mask when they're closer than that. So I would say, in our opinion, the room capacity, dwell times, and making sure that people are, how many people are in an area is far more important.
Great, thank you very much, Carrie. So just looking at the time, we did a lot, 45 minutes, and then just a bit of time for questions. I think we'll go ahead and wrap it up for today. Like I said, if we hadn't gotten to your question, we will follow up with you. Also on your screen, you will see ways to contact us as well. So you can contact sales@guardrfid.com. Carrie also mentioned the contact tracing. We have done a recent webinar where the recording would be on our website. So that's guardrfid.com. If you want to take a look at that as well. And likewise, the recording from today's webinar will be up in the next couple days as well, so you'll be able to access that from our website. So with that in mind, on behalf of Carrie, Merrick, and myself, I just want to thank you again for joining today's presentation, and I wish you a great afternoon. Thank you very much.